Hello book friends, I'm Jen and welcome to my reading life. Today I am starting a brand new series which I am calling Getting to Know Me, the Bookish edition. This is going to be a 6-part series where I am going to walk you through some of my favorite books in different categories, and then I'm going to end with a video on a few of my favorite bookish things that maybe aren't books per se, but definitely enhance my reading life. So to start off, this first video is going to be some of my favorite books and authors that I would consider to be contemporary fiction. All of these were written after 1900, so they are from the 20th and or 21st century. So I have 5 authors to share, and these are authors who I have read a number of books by them, or perhaps all of their books. For my favorite books, they are books where maybe I've only read 1 or 2 books by that particular author, or they only wrote 1 or 2 books. So I wouldn't necessarily consider them a favorite author per se, but I definitely loved this particular book by them. So I'm going to get started. This is not an inclusive list by any means. I started out originally with a lot more books and it was just going to be an incredibly long video. So I have cut it down to 5 of my favorite authors and 5 of my favorite books. So again, not an inclusive list, but hopefully this gives you just kind of a good overview of the types of books and authors I like to read. Let's get started. First up is going to be Rosamunde Pilcher. I first read Rosamunde Pilcher. It's probably been well over a decade now that I first read this book, The Shell Seekers, and absolutely fell in love with it. Rosman Pilcher is an English author. She writes many of her books set in Cornwall and the surrounding areas, and she loves to write a good family saga, village life, just sort of those epic, sweeping dramas where we get to learn about lots of characters over a long period of time. And I'd say that categorizes her longer novels, of which The Shell Seekers is definitely one. She's also written quite a few short stories and some shorter novels as well, but definitely these chunky, big, epic stories are where she really shines. And both The Shell Seekers and Coming Home by her are 2 excellent places to start if you're looking to begin your journey with Rosman Pilcher. Highly recommend. Next up is Mary Stewart. I discovered Mary Stewart back in my late teens when I was going through a bit of an obsession with the King Arthur legend. And my mom recommended that I try the Merlin series by Mary Stewart, which I did, and I absolutely loved and devoured. And then I think my mom might have had one of her romantic suspense novels on her shelf, or she pointed me to her, and I started tracking down all her books when I worked at a bookstore during college. And I read everything of hers that I could get my hands on. So outside of her Merlin series, most of her adult novels are what I would categorize as romantic suspense. So there's a little bit of romance, there's some sort of mystery or intrigue going on. There's always a young woman as the central character, and she's usually in her 20s. She is often traveling to an exotic location like Greece or Switzerland or France. They are just fantastic, fun stories. She writes a denouement that is so exciting in nearly every single one of her books. There's often an exciting chase scene at the end. Mary Stewart, highly recommend. Thornyhold is an excellent one, not necessarily representative of her romantic suspense per se. This one has a little bit of magical realism to it, but Airs Above the Ground, My Brother Michael, The Gabriel Hounds, any of those would be excellent places to start. My next author, I'm going to give a little bit of a caveat about. Because do you have books or authors that you feel a little bit protective of? Like somehow they belong to you a little bit and you love them so much, you don't really want to hear a bad word said about them or their books or their characters or their stories. That's this next author for me. And that is Laurie Colwin. I, again, discovered Laurie Colwin through my mom. She has been an excellent source of book recommendations for me throughout the year. Hi, Mom. Love you. Thank you for all the wonderful books you brought into my life. And Laurie Colwin was writing during the 70s, 80s. And she lived in New York. Most of her stories are set in New York. And she writes about relationships and what it's like to sort of be figuring yourself out in those early days of relationships. Happy All the Time is about two couples, Holly and Guido, and Vincent and Misty, and it just sort of tracks their start of their relationships and how they get to know each other and how their relationships develop over time. She's just a wonderful, wonderful writer. Happy All the Time, Goodbye Without Leaving, A Big Storm Knocked It Over. Any of those would be excellent places to start, and I just love her. So please be kind about her in the comments. My next author is Kate Morton. I discovered Kate Morton when The House of Riverton was released back in, I think, 2006 was when it came out. And I somehow heard about it, checked it out from the library, and absolutely loved it. I think Kate Morton is one of the best contemporary writers who is able to write a dual timeline story that I find interesting and believable, and where I am equally interested in both the past storyline and the present day storyline, which I often find is not the case when writers try to do that back and forth in time. But I think Kate Morton is really strong at doing this. She's definitely an auto-buy author for me. I will read whatever she puts out. Just find her stories immersive, and they're set in beautiful locations, either in England or her most recent one was set in Australia. And her books are just page turners. Okay, my last favorite author I'm going to talk about today is one that I've recently discovered over the past year, and that is D.E. Stevenson. I read Miss Bunkle's book last January and just adored it. I thought it was just witty and charming and laugh out loud funny. Miss Bunkle was such a wonderful character. She holds a very special place in my heart now because I just absolutely adored her. I read Miss Bunkle Married also, which I liked maybe even a little bit more than Miss Bunkle's book. So if you've read this one, I definitely recommend the sequel. I have since read 3 more of D.E. Stevenson's books, all of which I loved. I talked about Victoria Cottage in my January wrap-up video, and it may be my favorite of hers now that I've read it, and I'm looking forward to reading the sequel to that one this month. You know, she sort of falls into this middle brow women's writers category that is sort of having a revival right now, and I am completely here for it. The furrowed middle brow books that have been put out by Dean Street Press. I am trying to get my hands on as many of them as I possibly can because I've loved every single one that I've read so far. Okay, next up, we're going to dive into my favorite books that I have selected to share with you for this video. So the first book I want to share is Daddy Longlegs by Jean Webster. This is an epistolary novel. It's a coming-of-age story where we follow Jerusha, and she's an orphan, and she one day receives an anonymous letter from an anonymous benefactor who wants to send her to this sort of posh northeastern women's college, and the only caveat is that she needs to write him letters and tell him about how she's doing and what's going on at school, and so she does, and that is the entirety of this slim little book, but it is just lovely. Again, if you enjoy a coming-of-age story, this one is absolutely fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. Next up in my sweeping family sagas books that I love is The Thorn Birds by Colleen McCullough. This is set in the Australian outback, and it begins in the early 1900s, I believe around 1915, and we span decades with this family through to, I believe, almost 1970. So we follow the Cleary family and sort of all of the ins and outs of what happens to them over the course of their lives. And I think many of you will probably be familiar with the mini-series that came out in the 1980s, which I've never actually watched, but I want to maybe see if my library has a copy of it. I would love to watch it at some point. I just devoured this book. This book is just the perfect perfect summer beach read. Pack it on a vacation where you're gonna have lots of time to read and just become invested in this fantastic, sweeping family drama. Highly, highly recommend. My next book is Marjorie Morningstar by Herman Wouk. This book, this specific book, I received for Christmas my junior year of high school. So this book is 40-something years old. No, almost 40-something years old. This book had such an impact on me when I read it. I was very much involved with the theater when I was in high school, and this book made me want to be an actress and helped me decide to be a theater major, which I eventually changed and became an English major. This book follows Marjorie, and she grew up in New York City and she decides to become an actress. This follows her throughout her life as an actress and all of the dramas and love affairs and everything that goes on with her. And Herman Wouk, I think, really writes a saga well. And I haven't read it since I first read it when I was in high school, but it's just one of those books that like evokes those memories of my own coming of age, and I have such fond memories of it. Marjorie Morningstar, if you want a coming of age story that's really epic and, you know, becomes that sort of sweeping drama, then this is the book. Okay, next up. The Red Notebook by Antoine Laurain. I purchased this book a few years ago and then it promptly sat on my shelf, as books do. I absolutely loved this book. The best way I can describe it is to say it is like a French While You Were Sleeping, the movie with Sandra Bullock. That's this book set in Paris. So it is about this bookseller. His name is Laurent Letellier, and he comes across one day a abandoned handbag, and he collects it and he decides he's going to try to find the owner of it and return it to her. But there's no information inside of it. There's no name, there's no wallet, there's no identification of any kind. All there is some personal belongings and this red notebook that has different, you know, jottings. I mean, it's almost like a commonplace book where she's written down just things about her life and things that strike her and, you know, lists and different kinds of things. And from this information, he's going to try to track this person down. It's a bit of a love story. It's a bit of a mystery, and it's very slim. As you can see, it is just wonderfully well done. I was fully immersed in the story. I think I read it in one day, just utterly delightful, and the ending is fantastic. My final book is Emerald by Elizabeth Luard. It's an alternate history wherein Elizabeth Luard imagines what could possibly have happened had King Edward and Wallis Simpson had a child out of wedlock while he was still king. And what if that child was then taken away, raised across the world, and kept hidden from everybody? What all goes on with her life, behind the scenes, with her parents. I was utterly enchanted when I read this decades ago. I read this for the first time, and I reread it again just a few years ago and was equally as entranced by it when I reread it. So this, again, can you tell what types of stories I like? I really like to be swept away. This book is just fantastic. I believe this might be out of print. I'll see what I can find for you all. That's it for my favorite books and authors of the contemporary fiction variety. So I hope that gave you just a little bit of a glimpse into the types of books and authors that I enjoy reading. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Do we have any favorite books and authors in common? What are some of your favorite books and authors? Can you recommend anything to me similar to books that I've mentioned today that I should put on my TBR? Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be back again with the next part of this series very soon. Please hit the like button for this video and subscribe if you're not already subscribed and would like to hear more bookish content from me. And I will be back with another video soon. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye.